Abandoned cars are everywhere. There are a few parked up on the side streets of every city. You'll often find them hiding in underground car parks, coated in thick dust after years of neglect. Next time you see one, pay closer attention to it. It might not be just another discarded old heap of junk. It might be a rare and valuable automobile that somebody's forgotten about. You might not think that expensive cars get abandoned, but they do. And everything you're about to see in this video is proof of that. There are plenty of expensive luxury cars that have been left ownerless in Saudi Arabia, but the majority of them are modern Porsches and Bentleys. This old rusty Maserati stands out from the crowd, and that's not just because it's in such a poor state of repair. To give it its full title, this is a 1961 Maserati 5000 GT with an approximate value of $1 million. And yet it was left behind for years to cope with the desert winds, alone and unprotected. The chassis number of the vehicle confirms that it was only the 18th 5000 GT ever to be produced, and the only one ever to have a body created by Ghia. When it was brand new in July of its release year, its first owner was Lambretta Scooter's own Ferdinando Innocenti, but he sold it on during the 1970s, and the route it took to Saudi Arabia is unknown. In its current state, it's evident that the old Maserati is going to need a lot of care and attention to restore it to its best. But imagine how much money it might be worth then, if it's valued at $1 million even as a wreck. While we're on the topic of Maseratis, here's another one that deserved a better fate than the one it met with. It's a far more recent model than the 1961 beauty we just looked at, but it might be in a worse state. The beautiful white car appears to have been abandoned after crashing into a riverbed in Israel. The land that it's wedged on is dry now, but Israel had been plagued by floods a little earlier in September 2015, the same month the car was found. Presumably, the driver found themselves trapped in the floodwaters, couldn't get out, and thought the best thing to do was leave their Maserati behind. Who does that? Based on the amount of mud and foliage in and around the vehicle, it seems likely that it was pulled down the river after it was abandoned, and there's now a thick layer of filth inside the car. Even with that damage, though, most of the critical pieces still appear to be there, and a competent mechanic could probably rescue it. We hope someone was given a chance to do so. Under normal circumstances, if you see a vehicle as badly wrecked as our next abandoned supercar is, you would also expect to find its driver either severely injured or deceased. When the police found this twisted mass of steel in May 2018, the driver was nowhere to be found. That implies that they ran away from the scene without leaving a note of explanation or phoning for help. All the authorities knew is that someone had destroyed a truly beautiful piece of automobile art. Believe it or not, if you could straighten out the wreck and put the pieces back together, this would be a McLaren 720S, with a value somewhere in the region of $400,000. The car was found in the desert of Nevada, USA, and it later transpired that it had been taking part in a Corsa rally event when the driver lost control of the powerful car. He and his passenger were later tracked down to a local hospital, where they'd miraculously escaped with only minor injuries. How they managed to get to the hospital is unknown, and they never explained why they didn't call the police. What an odd story this is! If you know anything about motor racing and classic car design, you'll know that any Shelby project has value. You would also know that the prototype for the Shelby Cobra Coupe would have value almost beyond measure. So how on earth could that car, also known as Shelby Cobra Daytona Chassis CSX2287, come to be abandoned? It's appeared in movies, video games, and posters on the walls of petrol heads all over the world. But from the 1970s until 2001, it was thought to have been lost forever. After a long racing career in which it set a whole 25 records at Bonneville Salt Flats, the car was bought by former racing driver Jim Russell, and then sold on to eccentric music producer Phil Spector. Nobody knows what Spector did with it, but that was the last anyone heard of the car until it was found in the private storage unit of a recently deceased artist called Donna O'Hara at the start of the 21st century. By that point, it was in a poor state and clearly hadn't been driven for years. but it's now been partially restored and placed on display at the Simeone Foundation Automobile Museum. When a vehicle is a world record holder, it deserves to either be in constant use or in a museum so people can see it, especially when the record it holds is for being the longest car in the world. That honor goes to the super long stretch limousine known as the American Dream that was built by California's J. Orberg during the 1990s. Jay took a broken-down 1970 Cadillac Eldorado and carried on fixing new parts to both the front and the back until his limo was 100 feet long. When he reached that milestone, he added a helicopter landing pad on the roof for good measure. Unsurprisingly, the car struggled to turn corners because of its length, and therefore has never legally been permitted to drive on America's roads. That limited it to special appearances at car shows and other events. But it was on one such duty in the early 21st century that it met with its fate. A company that had leased the American Dream as a promotional vehicle went bankrupt and the car disappeared. When it was eventually found in 2012, it was a rusted, beaten-up shell of its former self. You wouldn't want to hang out in its jacuzzi with the limo in this state. Fortunately, the AutoZeum Automotive Teaching Museum of New York took ownership of the wreck and have since performed a full restoration. Every classic car manufacturer starts somewhere. Even the best-known and most successful car companies in the world begin with a single model. And for Aston Martin, it was this car. You'll have to forgive it for not looking its best right now. It's very old. It's a 1949 Aston Martin fixed-head coupe, one of only 3 ever built, and it raced at the 24 Hours of Le Mans race that year. The other 2 prototypes failed. Only this one made it to the finish line. After the race was over, it became the template for the DB2 in 1950. The original still raced occasionally, taking to the track throughout the 1950s, before ending up in the ownership of one Christopher Angel during the 1970s. It was still there when he passed away, and after 30 years of rotting in his garden, it was briefly stolen in 2002 before being recovered. Despite its shabby appearance, its real value lies in the fact that it still has all of its original features, and to the right classic car collector, it could be worth anything up to $1 million. Earlier on in this video, we said that any Shelby motor vehicle is valuable, and that anyone who knows anything about cars would already know that. From the state of this abandoned Shelby, the only thing we can assume is that whoever owns it knows nothing about cars. It's a once beautiful 1965 Shelby GT350 that's been partially taken to pieces, surrounded by paint tins covered in wood, and then left in the desert outside California's Yucca Valley. According to the person who took these photos, it's been there for almost 40 years. Fortunately, thanks to that very same person, this story has a happy ending. The photographer was Mark Mitchell, who used to race the car during the early 1970s, and as he got older, he often wondered if his beloved old racing car still existed. It took him years to track it down, and when he saw it in this condition, it almost broke his heart. Mark was able to persuade the Shelby's owner to sell the vehicle to him, and Mark's now embarked on a one-man restoration project. One day, he hopes to be able to take it for at least one more high-speed lap. There are some problems money can't solve, and some objects money can't buy. Take this Ferrari Enzo, for example. Even under a thick layer of dust, you can still see that it's an incredible car. Somebody wants to buy it, and has made a bid of $1.6 million. The owners would like to sell it. Despite those facts, the vehicle remains unsold. And that's because it's been impounded in Dubai. And technically speaking, the owners are the police. The status of the car is complicated. It was bought by an American living in Dubai in 2011, but he fled the country not long afterward. It later transpired that he was wanted by Interpol. The police took ownership of several of his assets, including the Enzo. But the investigation into the car's owner is still ongoing, and it's possible that the prancing horse was bought with money that was directly linked to criminal activities. That means it has to remain impounded for as long as the investigation takes, no matter how many million-dollar-plus offers are made on it. DeLorean cars found fame thanks to the global success of the Back to the Future series of movies. which are as popular today as they were when they were released 30 years ago. DeLoreans can't really travel in time, but that didn't stop the brand from getting a boost from the role their cars played in the film. This particular DeLorean, though, hasn't been to the past or the future. Instead, it spent 35 years in a barn. To be more specific about the model, it's a DeLorean DMC12 that had been parked up and gathering dust since 1986. All of the images you see here were taken from the father and son restoration team who woke it from its deep sleep in 2016 and took it home with them to refurbish and clean up. The DeLorean's previous owner didn't really have a reason as to why he'd left it languishing in the barn for so long. His only explanation was that he'd bought it and then never found a use for it. Here's an idea for people with that mindset. If you buy a fantastic car, drive it and show it off. Here's a mystery that Sherlock Holmes would be proud of. 20 years ago, a mansion in a rural district of England was abandoned in mysterious circumstances with all the doors closed. As the years passed, the house became a time capsule, as everything inside it remained untouched. Eventually, it was found again by a team of urban explorers who discovered not only the hidden treasures inside the house, but also the beautiful cars hiding in this ramshackle barn outside it. Not all of them are exceptionally rare or valuable. For example, the crumpled and green stationed Citroën DS that dominates many of the pictures. But the battered red Jaguar right next to it would once have been worth a lot of money. There's a Triumph 2000 outside the house too, covered in so much moss that it's almost become a carpet. In total, there are 14 cars dotted around the property's exterior, although most of them are in such a poor state that they'll never move again. Sadly, we think it's likely that they were discovered too late to rescue them. The entire estate has since been valued at $750,000, and it's hoped that a buyer will be found soon. Cars that have the word Daytona in their name tend to be worth holding on to as investments. That won't be true of every single vehicle bearing the name, but it's likely to be accurate more often than it isn't. Take a look at this rusty, dusty 1969 Dodge Daytona. It's taken a battering over the years. It's misshapen, and it's starting to fall to pieces. Even with all of those facts taken into account, it's still worth $200,000. Only around 500 of these cars were ever built, and this one has been hidden in a barn in Wisconsin, USA for more than 40 years. When it was brand new, it was bought for less than $4,000. Admittedly, its condition isn't great, but what makes it valuable is the fact that all of the original factory parts are still present and correct, right down to the wing on the back of the vehicle. After its discovery, the car was sent on to auction, so we hope it's now in the hands of someone who's been able to get the old motor running again and let the car show what it's capable of. We've seen a couple of abandoned cars with million-dollar values in this video already, but this next one is the cherry on the cake. It's a 1937 Bugatti Type 57S Atalante that once belonged to the racing driver Francis Curzon, best known to motorsports fans as the man who won the 24 Hours of Le Mans race in 1931. Curzon didn't keep hold of it for long after he bought it, and over the years it changed hands many times, until it ended up with a doctor named Harold Carr, who paid only $1,000 for it. For reasons best known to himself, Carr kept the Bugatti under lock and key for more than 40 years and never drove it. Even his family didn't know it was there until they inherited his estate after he passed away. That was in mid-2009. The family asked an expert to come and take a look at the Bugatti, and the expert couldn't believe his eyes. Such is the rarity and pedigree of this car that the expert felt it was worth at least $3 million. When Bonhams eventually auctioned it, it far exceeded that estimate and sold for $4.5 million. That's an incredible return on a $1,000 purchase. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!